Hello and welcome to New Filmmakers Los Angeles in partnership with Movie Maker magazine. I'm Marissa Herrera and I'm here with filmmaker Gordon Moore and his film Rainpot. Let's take a look at a clip. Hello, Gordon, and thank you so much for joining me here today. And congratulations on your film. It was beautifully told. Can you give us a synopsis for our audience members that haven't had a chance to see it yet?
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me. It's really special being a part of this great festival. Rainpot was my thesis film for Rhode Island School of Design, and it's an experimental animation live action film which uses ceramics as a medium. And so I explore through the process of making ceramics this kind of reflection of my life. And yeah.
Fantastic. So as as having a practice in ceramics and being a filmmaker, what came first? Was it, the ceramics or the filmmaking?
I think that's a good question. I never thought I would go to school for filmmaking. I actually, growing up, both my parents are artists working in object-based art, both painting and ceramics. So since high school, I was making objects, and actually through my time at college, while I was majoring in animation, I was working as a potter in the summers. So I think my approach to filmmaking comes from the perspective of an object maker, and especially with this film, from the perspective of somebody who makes objects which are designed to become part of someone's routine, like a mug or a teapot or a vase, something that's going to live with somebody and in that way change with them, or their perspective on the object will change. So I think in thinking about Rainpot, when I first was coming up with the idea, it was almost from the perspective of an object maker rather than the perspective of a filmmaker. And it was kind of seeing, like in my animation classes, it was seeing like a stop motion set and then kind of the entry into this world that the camera sees. But it's also an interest in like what the set is as an object, like when the camera's not seeing it and when it has like limits. And then if you look at like objects, like a piece of pottery, it's like how we're viewing that usually is through a screen or like as a photo, it's like the same kind of documentation of a set. So I was just, through this film, I was trying to think of a way to give an online life to an object that might allow it to exist as more than just a photo. And it would allow it to kind of change the way an object does as you live with it. Even though, it's not literally that same type of change, but yeah.
No, that's beautiful. And how did you, you said that it was a college project. So was the assignment that it had to be stop motion animation, or was that just something that you chose as a way to be able to share this story?
Yeah, it was just something I chose. Honestly, RISD in the department for animation, they encourage you to just do whatever you want. It's really like if you want to make something, their definition of what animation is very loose. And so actually at the time that I started this project, I was taking my animation senior studio, and then I was also taking a ceramic sculpture class. And then I also was taking a class on the history of portraiture and the way we portray people and objects throughout history. So this film was almost a product of trying to combine my different workloads from different classes into one project. So rather than dividing my time thin, I could look at where like a class could be the research for the film, and where the film can also be a sculpture.
That's great. And with that, and it being a project, what was your timeline? Did you, because with this process, there's so much of the creation of it, right? Of like having to figure that part out and then figuring out what worked, right? And shooting it and then going back. So like, what was your timeline from conception to finished product?
Right. Well, we started the project, or I'll say like my whole class was starting our thesis works, starting in October of 2019, with the deadline being May of 2020. And ideally, you're supposed to, do pre-production, production, post-production for at least like the last semester, just working on sound design. I think where my film ended up, it was like half a year of experimentation that kind of led to like throwing away that year and making pretty much producing until like the last month of the film. And I mean, my film was constantly changing because it was experimental, and I knew I wanted something that was more technique driven than anything. I didn't come in with a whole storyboard of like a specific story I wanted to tell. Rather, I wanted it to read almost like it's almost like a cup of tea, And my whole life and the classes I was taking throughout the whole 8 months or however long it was I was working on it was like the tea bag that was just enriching that and changing that water like the whole time. It's a very like Potter specific uh, you know example there, but
No, it's a beautiful
I
analogy.
will,
I actually
but
love that.
in other words, it wasn't I wasn't very organized in the way I like divided my time throughout the whole thing. I was using a technique that was new to me. This idea of making zoetropes out of ceramics and animating on the side, and so the whole film was also me like learning how to use this technique and what I could do with it and how I can work within this limitation of how much I can tell within the circumference of a pot. So I kind of kept on producing and producing and producing, and then did like a crazy amount of editing maybe in the last like 2 months, where I was left with like a feature length film worth of different footage and potentials for like different films. uh, and I kind of had to figure out what film I wanted to make out of it.
No, fantastic. And I have a background as a dancer. It's one of my disciplines, and one of the things that I just found so beautiful about this piece is that I felt, because there's no speaking in the film, that the language was movement. And just the way that you shot it, the images that were painted and how everything started to move, and it just added a whole new layer of texture and emotion in the storytelling,
Thank you.
accompanied by the beautiful soundscape that you created with that. So what came first? I know it's like a chicken egg question, but did you create the work and just hear something in your head for like the timing, because it really reads like a symphony and it's
Mm-hmm.
beautiful. So how did that process come together for you?
Yeah, I mean, it started with the visuals. Throughout the whole process, it started with the visuals, and then actually working on sound design was something exciting for me because I found that like the abstract textures within this film were a great example of how sound can influence greatly how we interpret a visual. So within these textures, playing them with like ocean sounds, you would see waves versus like bird sounds. You see birds. If you played sounds of like a crowd of people or cars or a train, then they suddenly become mechanical. Those were all routes I was thinking of taking. Uh, and then in the music, I went through a lot of different types of music, um, influenced by like minimalist artists, thinking of like Philip Glass, and then also thinking of like West African polyrhythms and different types of percussion. Or uh, one of my professors recommended I look at this like Indonesian music, but basically the theme of the music I was listening to as inspiration uh, kind of had these rhythms which kind of came together. They were like rhythms of different cadences that kind of lined up in certain areas. And actually, as I talk about this, I'm realizing that the music I used in my actual film doesn't necessarily apply those. But again, this is like part of the process of making this film was uh, one of like constant experimentation and change. But ultimately, I wanted music that helped uh, bring you into like the visuals and the mood without distracting from them. And I think I found as I experimented with different sound design, I wanted all the sounds to be linked to uh, like real sources. So, you know, like waves or birds. And then the music, even though they're notes, they're also linked to like a percussive movement. So I was playing it on like a metal tongue drum. So every note you're hearing also has an element of percussion. Uh, yeah.
Amazing. And what has the experience been like for you as a filmmaker? You know, we live with the process, you know, for so long, and we see all the different versions of everything, and you know, to finish it and then be able to now share it, you know, with a public audience. What has that experience been like?
Yeah, it's been so exciting and overwhelming, and you know, every range of emotion. Like you know, it's tough this year that it's everything's virtual because you know it's always been a dream when I was starting in college and traveling around to film festivals with my class. You know, to one day go as a director and travel with my film physically. But still, I've been so impressed and uh, by all the different virtual experiences I've encountered and how real they've been feeling. I will say, like the process of making a film from start to finish, like this one, was something that was very exhausting. Just because it has so many elements that have to come together in a cohesive way. So I am still kind of you know, catching my breath from that process before I dive into another film. Uh, but it's been a lot of fun traveling with my film and getting to share it. I mean, the most important thing for me is just that it's able to be shared with people who would be interested by it, who it's going to strike a chord with.
No, absolutely. And, you know, as you said, you're taking a breath, but is there anything that you're working on creatively now that, you know, we are in the middle of a global, you know, pandemic, our lives as creatives look very different. Is there anything you're working on now and anything that, you know, we can look forward to in the near future?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, actually, when I came home in March because of the pandemic and left school, I lost studio access and I had to find a studio on Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts, where I live, that would be able to kind of support my finishing of the vessels in the film and firing them. And anyway, I got in touch with a studio, and I'm still working at that studio today. We ended up extending our relationship, and uh, I'm working as a studio assistant for them in exchange for studio space. Um, so I'm not filmmaking right now, but I am doing a lot of object making and working as a potter. And I'm hoping to do more sculptural film combinations. That's something I'm hoping to do in the coming year. But right now I'm focusing on work which will live in gallery spaces and work that will exist just in people's lives, you know, on their kitchen counter or in their hand.
Amazing. Experimental film is I think something that either people gravitate to as filmmakers or kind of shy away from. because there are formats, but there's not necessarily set rules, so people don't know, what the access point into it is. Do you have, any advice for a young filmmaker that might be interested in exploring experimental film?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd say something I learned at RISD that I'm, really grateful for is that you can find animation or filmmaking anywhere. I mean, animation is just any sequence of marks or patterns or things put to time. And so it's pretty exciting when you start just, putting photographs together or seeing, light posts that you're passing on the road and what happens when you just, put them side by side. Uh, so I think and also as I was saying before, uh, filmmaking for me doesn't have to always be in the form of a film. I think a lot of the same ideas are just applied to how people share photographs and how people, consume anything through a screen. I think it all has the same, ways of thinking of looking at that stop motion set and deciding how you want to uh, frame this landscape in this world. Uh, so I think just, losing a very tight idea of what filmmaking is and what it has to be is something that's very exciting and something that I'm, uh, still very excited by and excited to see, how my understanding changes and where it goes from here.
I love it. Well, again, Gordon, congratulations, on Rainpot. Thank you again for sharing, your story and your process with us today. We look forward to all the incredible creative endeavors that lie ahead. And to our audience, thank you so much for joining us today. And on behalf of New Filmmakers LA and Movie Maker Magazine, we'll see you again soon. Thank you.